reads today, I hear. It's the first nice day of the spring. Well, this is welcome to Jefferson County's 7th annual community read, based on that special book that I know so many of you have read, Hannah's Dream, which is Diane Hammond's 3rd book. I've talked to so many of you who have read and enjoyed this book, of course, about the aging elephant, her aging keeper, the aging zoo, and oh, those quirky characters that she came up with. Tonight we're going to hear how Diane's work with Keiko the killer whale, star of the movie Free Willy, led to a book about an elephant. In Diane's workshop this morning, she did a writer's workshop that was really so fun. Some of the participants mentioned that after reading Hannah's Dream, they wanted to know more about elephants. Well, after I read it, I felt exactly the same way. And so for the past 6 months, I've been reading books and watching videos about elephants and killer whales and chimpanzees. So here's a few elephant facts for you, because, and I'll get to what Diane said. So according to the Oregon Zoo website, an Asian male elephant can grow as tall as 12 feet and weigh 7 tons, lives an average lifespan of 45 years, eats up to 500 pounds of vegetation, and drinks 30 to 50 gallons of water every day. Well, it's hard to picture 12 feet, but George Hawes and Dion climbed up, and that piece of tape up there, they measured twice, is 12 feet. So, you know, that just struck me as so strange. I really couldn't picture 12 feet. But Diane's response to the writers this morning was interesting. She said there are times when too many facts can get in the way of the story, and she's not really an elephant expert. So I suspect she will talk a little bit about that tonight, because we expected her to know all these things about elephant, but it was really the characters in the story. So tonight you get to hear about Diane, but we were fortunate that her husband Nolan has come along, Nolan Harvey. And if you saw Susan's wonderful article in the paper this week, they were able to use the picture. And here's Nolan in his office, and there's Keiko looking in the window at the Oregon Aquarium. So Nolan turned out to be quite an interesting person, as we have been talking to him for the last 2 days. He's been working all over the world with, as he says, everything from bugs to blue whales. In fact, he says there's only been 2 countries that he hasn't been in, and I think it was Cuba and Nepal. And he's been in every other country in the world working with animals, including elephants. And he was in charge, he was the one in charge of Keiko's rehabilitation. So there's a couple stories that I hope you get a chance to ask him about that are just fascinating about Keiko. We don't get to hear some of those stories, and he's here in person and can tell a good story. Then last weekend, I read and enjoyed Diane's newest book, which came out just 3 weeks ago. Seeing Stars is the story of four child and teen actors seeking fame in Hollywood, and was inspired by the 2 years Diane and her family spent in Hollywood supporting their daughter, their teenage daughter, as she pursued a professional acting career. And it's really a whole different picture than we imagined. And Diane says it's not autobiographical, but the mother in the story is really a lot her, and it really felt very, very real. So if your daughter or son wants to do that, read this book. We want to thank the sponsors who made this program possible: the Jefferson County Cultural Coalition, the Jefferson County Library District, and the Rotary Club of Jefferson County. And please thank all the members of the Community Read Committee who are wearing these name tags, as well as all of the people behind the scenes, such as the entire library staff, have been wonderful in helping support this event and putting up with my bugging them. Oh, you're here this week, Ruthann, yeah? Okay. this also happens to be National Library Week, and Sally Beasley, Jefferson County librarian, wants to make a presentation. And I've got this right here.
Okay, great. In honor of National Library Week, we decided to have drawing, and so everybody who came into the library to check out a book this week got to enter in the drawing. And we're giving away 4 books. 2 copies of this book, Panorama, and 2 copies of Diane's new book, Seeing Stars. And so after the writers' workshop today, we had Diane pull the names out of the boxes, so we had 17 witnesses there, so they couldn't accuse me of something. And these are the people, and it was really fun because actually one of the kids who won this book, they had to be, to enter this drawing, they had to be a child under the age of 12, checking out a book on their own card. None of this checking it out on your parents' card business. But the 2 kids that won that were Emily Plant and Ephraim Sanders. And Emily just happened to be at the writer's workshop there with her mother, so it was really fun to see her face just light up when she go, oh, when she realized she had won the book. That was pretty special. And then for the 2 copies of Seeing Stars, the winners were Patricia Smith, who is here tonight, and so she won. And then the other one was Pedro Espinoza.
And Diane autographed both of them for them. Each book for them.
We'll get a hold of Pedro sometime this week and let him know he won. Eddie, but I know him, so well, no problem. He always comes to story time.
So that's National Library Week. A native New Yorker, Diane Hammond was first an Oregonian in 1984 when she moved to Newport. And I've really condensed this information because as we talk to her, we keep hearing about all of these other things that she's done. She was awarded an Oregon Arts Commission Literary Fellowship and wrote 2 books while also pursuing a career in public relations and communications for nonprofit organizations. In that capacity, she was public relations manager for the brand new Oregon Coast Aquarium. She acted as Keiko's press secretary, first for the aquarium and then for the Free Willy Keiko Foundation. Now, can't you just see her resume? There are more people who have been press secretary to the president than have been press secretary for a killer whale. After 2 years in Tacoma, Washington, and 2 years in Los Angeles, Diane and her family settled in Bend in 2007. So please welcome Diane Hammond, and let's find out how a killer whale became an Asian elephant, and we must be sure that she talks about her boots.
Thank you for being here, especially on this beautiful evening when we haven't had all that many of them recently. Let me tell you the boot story first, because it'll give you a good sense that I don't take things overly seriously. When I first became a published writer, which had been the thing I wanted for Christmas almost all my adult life, it was magical. I had gotten my wish. On the other hand, I also was a real phobic about reading aloud and public speaking. Well, when you go on your first book tour, you can't be up there drooling and sobbing. So I thought, all right, I've got to do something to really get myself under control and give myself strength and empower myself. So I decided that one way to do that would be to have my clothes cooperate with me. And I am a New Yorker, though I've been an Oregonian since 1984. I don't consider myself, okay? Press should side over, but I'm going to walk away in a second because I decided that if my clothes had chutzpah, then I would have chutzpah. So I had bought myself 6 pairs of increasingly ridiculous boots, and the wilder they are, the stronger they make me feel. So I told Ruth Ann the story a couple days ago, and so every day I've seen her, I've had boots on. And so I will show you my most outrageous pair, and then we can move on.
Ooh. Oh, wow.
I wear them very much tongue-in-cheek. I have no business whatsoever wearing cowboy boots. Anyway, that's that story. And they work. And I'm no longer phobic, thank God, because this is Seeing Stars that just came out as my 4th novel. I feel in many ways that I am still practicing to be a writer, and am blown away every time people read my books, any of my books, and find something to connect with. It's the greatest honor, it's the greatest privilege for people to come up to me and give me their impressions of what I have created and how they've received it. So I hope that I never, as a writer, take for granted that people will read my work and feel there's something there to bring back to me. Hannah's dream came about in a strange sort of way, in that I was one of the first 2 people on the staff of the Oregon Coast Aquarium, long before it was even built. I was the one giving tours in the mud, with little brick walls that I could talk about representing these much larger facilities. But the aquarium had been open for 1 year, and we were still very virgin. The director had had as little experience with running an aquarium as I had in representing one in public relations. So when we were approached by somebody who said, we have a sick whale, we have the money, how would you feel about becoming the place to rehabilitate Free Willy? And so the director, we were, I think, a 3-person staff by then, maybe there were a few more. She looked at me and I looked at her and we went, could be fun. So she said, sure. We later found out that every single other aquarium in the country had been approached and said, absolutely no way. We were to find out later just how controversial the project was going to be. And for anyone who was in Oregon in the mid-1990s, you probably noticed we were on the front page a fair amount of the time, and the project got uglier and uglier and uglier. However, my role was no longer really to do public relations for the whole Oregon Coast Aquarium, because Keiko brought us media from around the world, and somebody had to be with them. And we had a very strange attitude that we wanted the media to spend the day with us. As much time as they could give us, we wanted them to stay. My job was to interpret what the staff was doing so they understood what the project was about and how we were going about doing it. And Nolan, my husband, was the head of the rehab end of things. He was Keiko's boss, essentially. I was Keiko's press secretary. So every day for 2 years, I stood at the top of that pool and I told anyone and everyone Keiko's story. And it was a pretty amazing story. He was quite sick when he got to us. He was given a kind of rehabilitation that had never been done before. No one was making it up as we went along. It was kind of a combination of physical therapy, mental therapy, and boot camp. He had a lot of problems, and they all needed to be addressed if the project was to come to fruition the way we had hoped it would, and Keiko could be released back in the wild. So for 2 years, not only was I freezing most of the time, because anybody who knows the coast knows that 9 months out of the year there's nothing between Japan and you but a pine tree, and all that wind and rain comes right over you. So I learned to be freezing cold and talk at the same time anyway. But as the inter-organizational relationship between the Oregon Coast Aquarium, which owned the facility, and the Willy Keiko Foundation, which owned the whale, became more and more contentious, Nolan and I went from the employ of one to the other, and it got to be really ugly, really ugly. And we, unfortunately, both of us ended up on the front page a lot talking about our former employer. At the end of the 2 years, Keiko was in fact brought back to Iceland and put in a baby pen. He wasn't just cast down into the ocean, but our part, or my part of the project was over. I had a young daughter, and there was no way that I would be able to live in Iceland. And Nolan and I got married, and he too felt that the best thing would be to stay back in the States. And I've been a writer for a long time, though I wasn't at that time a published novelist, and I thought, somebody really ought to write about this project because it was so amazing in so many ways, and it involves so many diverse people with all of these different investments in the success or failure of the thing. Well, I very quickly found out, just how bad a nonfiction writer I am. I don't really care about the facts. I'd much rather make it up. That doesn't work. So very quickly I found that though somebody should be writing this history of this project, it probably wasn't going to be me. And so I went off, and Nolan and I started a company, and we moved to Bend, and we were busy with other things. And then I thought, you know, maybe now I would be better. Maybe it's time to try it again. No, it wasn't. Bad writing. So, and I still kept trying to make it up. But there was so much baggage that was associated with that project that it kept getting in the way of the story. If I wasn't going to write a nonfiction book about it, then maybe fiction, except that I was simply hostage to way too much stuff. And as a fiction writer, in many cases, it's better not to know too much. My job as a novelist is to know enough about my characters, including my elephant, that he or she is credible to you, the reader. If you believe my elephant, I've done my job. I'm not an expert. In fact, I know probably much less about elephants than Ruth Ann does. But that's okay, as long as you believe me and I'm being accurate to the extent that I'm portraying an elephant, I'm meeting my contract with you, the reader. And so what happened was, Nolan suggested, well, if you can't write about the Keiko project, why don't you think about a different animal? Maybe that will allow you to get at the guts of the thing without all of that baggage. So I thought, well, I don't know anything about elephants. I mean, I know nothing about elephants. I've never worked in animal care or zoos or anything. So he said, come with me to Tacoma, where he had worked among elephant keepers and been a zookeeper himself. So I spent 6 days, wishful thinking, 6 hours with 3 elephant keepers who had very difficult elephants to work with because they were all killers. And so these were very capable elephant keepers who knew exactly what they were doing. And I plied them with every question I could think of. How does an elephant look when it's angry? How does an elephant act when it's sick? What does an elephant do if it's feeling affectionate? How do the animals interact with each other and with you and with their toys? And so it went for 6 hours. That was the extent of my research. And I should probably not tell you that because it's probably shocking. But I wanted to create a character, a believable character, and I felt that I knew enough to make that character an elephant. And I hope I was right for the most part. Now I have an elephant, but I have no story. And so what do? You think, I don't know what I'm going to write about, so I better not write about anything and maybe a miracle will happen. Well, it did, in that I was watching TV one evening and channel flipping, and I went right by or stopped briefly at footage of a black man in the back of the semi unshackling an elephant and crying. And then I changed the channel. That was Sam. That was Hannah. That was my story. Actually, that was the end of the story, at the end of the book. Everything else was a what if. And this morning in class, I talked a lot about the gifts of what ifs, something that for an imaginative mind opens lots of potential. My what if was basically, who was that man? Why were they in the back of the semi? And why was he crying? And I made a point of not finding out until I had finished writing Hannah's Dream. But that was exactly what I needed to combine what I knew about zookeepers and to write a totally different book than the Keiko book. So I'm going to try something a little bit different. I'm going to try to talk to you about things that the two projects, the book and the Keiko experience, have in common, and then cross-reference with Hannah's Dream. And I apologize if this is a little lumpy. I haven't tried it before, but because I know you've either read the book or are familiar with it, I thought it might be a more interesting way to do this. Of course, I should have found my notes. The first thing that I wanted to do with this book was to make it a love story. Because in those 2 years of watching Nolan and his staff, what I saw that had nothing to do with the contentious, ugly stuff was that there are a very small number of people who will go to extreme lengths under very difficult, even painful situations to make their animals happy, essentially. Nolan and the people who worked for him spent 3 or 4 hours in that pool every single day, with or without a headache, with or without a cold. The water was 43 degrees and you can die in that. They were wearing wetsuits, but even so, at the end of the hours they were in the pool, they were all hypothermic. And I had my hands in the pool water seldom. Every time I did, it hurt like heck. You know, if you've ever had to hold an ice pack, how much that hurts. Their faces were always bare. Their eyes were always fully exposed so Keiko could see them. And it is a labor of love to do what they did. And so, again, departing from the Keiko Project and bringing over the good stuff to me was primarily the love that zookeepers have for their animals. So when I first started, why on earth do I have my phone? The brains will ignore it. I started the book exactly, in my writing of the book, this is where I started. It also happens to be the very first page. And what I attempted to do was give you that sense of deep personal commitment. So it begins, Samson Brown loved exactly two things in this world, his wife and his elephant. He nearly loved lots of others, of course, and had loved dearly some who are now dead and gone, his folks, his twin brother Jimmy, an old blue dog he'd had once. But real love in the here and now he reserved for Corinna and Hannah. He knew it, and he made sure they knew it too. Loving that hard and exclusive didn't make up for the things he couldn't give them, and there were lots of things he couldn't give them, but it went a ways. To a man like Sam, a realistic man, that was something. And that essentially framed my book for me as much as for you, and it positioned me exactly to write the kind of love story that I had in mind. I also wanted to carry over to you the tedium of what zookeepers do. I mean, it's to say that it is not glamorous, so people always thought, oh, you worked with Keiko, oh my God, it must have been so amazing. Yeah, but a lot of it has to do with scooping poop, and cleaning pools and things that are not sexy. So early on, again, Sam is thinking about the job that he has now gotten from Max Wiedelman and what it's involving for him to do. And he, in thinking to himself, says, Sam found it ironic that although he'd sworn never to work with food after Korea all those years ago, here he was, the same as every day, in the little kitchen in the barn, prepping groceries. He quartered apples, sundered yams, halved bananas and carrots and melons to make them all last longer. Corinna used to tease him about being Hannah's personal chef, and damned if it wasn't true. He didn't mind, though. Hannah's food meant a lot to her. And that has a lot to do with why these people do what they do. If an animal is food motivated, especially one that may be in a fairly small space, their food is everything. Anybody who's ever been on a long plane flight, you guys are going to know, you look forward to the peanuts and the pretzels. No, they're not any good, but they're what you got. They interrupt the day, they give you something to look forward to. Much the same way, an animal is very grateful and interested in his food. So that part of the tedium, it is tedious, but it is so important if you love your animals. You are doing for them, Jewish mothers would say the same thing, you are doing for them, you are giving to them the food of life, literally, and it's an act of grace, it's a gift. Neva Wilson, who, if you remember, is the young zookeeper who comes in kind of as a crusader to introduce new methods and to turn the zoo around and teach Sam, quickly finds that she's wrong, but she's reflecting on her career and a failed marriage, and she says, in the end, it hadn't been the body, but Neva's ex-husband, Howard, who had rebelled against tuna casserole. Not against her tuna casserole, but Neva's refusal to choose a different career path. He'd wanted to know how she could be passionate about jobs that listed shoveling shit as one of their major duties. When Neva was promoted out of the San Diego Zoo's African Savannah exhibit to become a full-time elephant keeper, he said, so what, you go from small shit to bigger and more dangerous shit, and that's the dream of a lifetime? And it is. For the people who love to work with animals, it is a very nitty-gritty sort of an enterprise. One of the things that I watched with Keiko and Nolan's staff too a lot, I think some of the most interesting times were watching them wake the whale up. Keiko was not only physically ill, but he'd been in a small hot pool where a lot of him was out of the water at any given time. It was too small, it was totally inadequate, the food was bad, and he had not much to think about, and certainly nothing to solve. So if you take an animal that's essentially been parboiling in a pool in an amusement park in Mexico City for 10 years, and you're thinking of getting them ready to go out into the wild, you've got a lot of mental work to do as well as a lot of physical rehabilitation. So the staff found all kinds of games to play that, much like passing a medicine ball back and forth in the old physical therapy days before the rubber bands and all of the snazzier things, they were designing things that would be physically challenging, but that would also be mentally challenging. And it's called enrichment. It's something that within the last 25 years, has become a big part of zookeeping, where you worry about the mental health of your animals as well as you worry about the physical health. And so when Neva comes into the zoo and is so determined to introduce Sam to these modern techniques, they come to almost to blows very early on. Sam has just gotten to work and she's already in the exhibit, but Hannah is still in the barn, which is not a happy place for Hannah. So Neva sings, "Good morning," she sang from the door leading out to the yard. "No, it's not," Sam snapped. "What in the name of God were you thinking, miss, leaving Hannah in here in her own filth while you were out there doing whatever it was you were doing? The girl's been in here all by herself since 6 o'clock last night." Neva winked. Winked. "Can you keep her busy for about 5 more minutes? I'm almost ready." "Girl, you and me are going to have some words, and they ain't going to be pretty neither." "Okay, but just give me 5 more minutes." And damned if she didn't sail out to the yard again, leaving Sam muttering things it was good that no one but Hannah could hear. He forked down a flake of hay from the loft and was about to start getting the day's fruit and vegetables ready in the kitchen when he found 2 big pans already filled with cut-up produce. "Okay," Neva called from the yard. "Let's have some fun. Go ahead and bring her out." "Come on, sugar, let's get you out of this mess and into some fresh air," Sam said to Hannah, clucking a little to encourage her. They both blinked as they stepped into the sunshine, as powerful as a searchlight after the fetid gloom of the barn. Neva was solidly planted next to the door with her arms folded across her chest, grinning like a fool. She put a finger to her lips to shush him. He was about to let his words fly when she motioned for him to turn around quick. When he did, he stopped dead in his tracks. Hannah was rushing around the yard. Bewildered, he looked at Neva, who just smiled and said in a low voice, "Watch, just watch. She's already figured it out." "She's a smart girl, your elephant." So Sam watched as Hannah lumbered over to one of the trees and found her tire in the highest notch in the branches. She ran her trunk around the outside of it and then around the inside, withdrawing a banana, which she neatly ate. Then she went back to the outside of the tire again, working on something Sam couldn't see. "Peanut butter," Neva said. "She's found the peanut butter." Sam just stood there. "Just wait," Neva said, clapping her hands. "Wait until she starts finding the pumpkins. There are 11 of them, and I filled them all with raisins and jelly beans." "A scavenger hunt," Sam said in wonder. "You've given Shug a scavenger hunt." Neva grinned. "It's one of my all-time favorite things. The animals light up just like Christmas." Sam shook his head. Hannah was hustling around, pulling bananas from branches, a pumpkin from inside a hollow log, squashes from the little wallow Sam kept for her. "Looks like Christmas came early this year. What time did you get here to do all of this?" Neva shrugged. 6:30. "Lord." Neva shrugged again. Sam watched as Hannah polished off a cache of bananas. "Guess I owe you an apology, miss." "No, you don't," Neva said. "How could you have known?" With Keiko, we did that. Nolan and his folks did a lot of things with play objects, with big, very hard plastic balls that couldn't be broken but could be pushed or pulled underwater. They were indestructible, but they were Keiko's first toys, and probably first toys ever. And he became especially attached to a blue ball that was roughly the size of a globe. And it was his first ball. And just as Hannah has her tire, her kind of Linus's blanket, her comfort item, Keiko had his blue ball. And so I gave Hannah a talisman, a toy that was her comfort object, like a teddy bear, because I'd seen Keiko when he was sick, when he was upset, when he was beyond understanding what was wanted of him. He would take his blue ball and sit with it. Maybe go to a corner of the pool, maybe just, push it ahead of him. But one way or another, that blue ball represented security. And so again, that was one of the reasons that I gave Hannah her toys. Another way that we did that, and I'll read you another passage, one of the most surreal things that I have ever done was watch television with Keiko. And Ruth Ann held up the picture of the office with an underwater window and Nolan leaning back in a chair. The staff had an office that was on the opposite side of the pool from the viewing gallery, if any of you went to Newport and saw Keiko. And he always knew that something was going on in the office because those were the people he knew best. So it's frustrating for the visitors in the gallery when Keiko would be across the pool looking in a window. They couldn't see anything going on, and they'd been there for an hour and he was still over there. At any rate, one of the things about animal keepers, zookeepers, is that they often have limited lives because their animals are their first priority, and so they tend to live and work in the same place. Keiko's vet believed that as he became healthier and therefore smarter, sharper, he needed something to do with his time when the viewing gallery was empty. And for animals that don't sleep in big chunks of time the way we do, it's a lot of time alone with nothing going on if you're the only whale or the only elephant. And so Keiko's vet prescribed television. We weren't allowed to talk about it much because it seems very much at odds with what you do to get an animal ready to go off into the wild, but there was definitely a good reason behind it. Someone who I can no longer remember donated a huge projection TV. It was before flat screens, but it was this big, huge, wonderful television. And so the picture in the paper, again, showed the whale looking into the office. We would turn that TV around so that it faced the water and show movies and TV to Keiko. But we were around anyway, so the staff would end up lining chairs up along the wall and watching Independence Day or professional wrestling or whatever it might be, and there is nothing more surreal than having a whale over your shoulder watching TV, and you are too. He did have personal favorites. He loved Independence Day. He loved professional wrestling. He did not like Free Willy or nature films. Beautiful pictures of killer whales in the wild left him cold, but he did like action films. So when it came time for me to decide how Sam and Corinna were going to look at taking care of Hannah, who they obviously had welcomed into their family as a child, it only seemed natural that they too would build part of the elephant barn into a living room where they could watch TV together for exactly the same reason. So I wrote about Neva Wilson, the maverick zookeeper, coming to the barn. She didn't know Sam well yet. She had no idea the relationship between Sam and Corinna and Hannah. She's just tired of moving, so she's come back to the zoo. To her surprise, she saw flickering lights in the elephant barn when she pulled up. She looked in the window as she approached, and of all things, she saw Hannah watching Star Wars on the barn's widescreen TV with Sam and Corinna. Sam was sitting in one of the armchairs with his foot up on an overturned steel bucket, while a big, beautiful woman removed a gauze dressing. As she pulled the barn door open, Neva overheard Sam saying, "I know, Mama." Both of them jumped when she appeared in the doorway. "I'm sorry, am I interrupting?" she said. The wound on Sam's foot looked old and serious. The woman moved to block Neva's view, quickly finishing applying ointment and a fresh dressing. "Mama was just fixing up a cut I got the other day," Sam said, pulling his sock up over the bandage. "Just me being clumsy, miss. How come you're here so late?" "No, I didn't want to be in my apartment anymore, and I'm sick of running errands, so I thought I would come down here and keep Hannah company for a little while." "Well, pull up a chair," Sam said. "This is my wife, Corinna. "Sugar, this is Miss Wilson." To Neva, he said, "Of course she knows all about you." "Uh-oh," Neva smiled as Corinna held out a warm, soft hand. "Sam told me all the good things you've done for baby." "We're just getting started," Neva said. Hannah wandered over, stood behind Corinna's chair, and put her trunk over Corinna's shoulder, sniffed beneath Corinna's ear. When Corinna held up her hand, Hannah blew a sweet, soft breath or two into her palm. "Aren't you just the sweetest thing?" Corinna crooned. Neva smiled. It was unusual to find a zookeeper's spouse who wanted to be included in an animal's care, never mind develop a relationship. More often they became resentful. "Do you do this often?" She indicated the television. 2 or 3 times a week, maybe, Sam said. "We've been doing it for years now." Down at the video store, they've got a little display, Hannah's Pick. She gets new releases, whatever she wants, for free. She likes action pictures. Independence Day is one of her favorites. She likes all the Star Wars pictures, too. Again, how does a killer rabbit become an Asian elephant? And Neva, much to her credit, realized they were onto something good right away and got with the program immediately. I won't read you passages because it'll be tedious, but there were a couple of other things that I used in the book for enrichment that are also happening at zoos all the time. One of them is painting. Remember how they give Hannah a paintbrush and paint and an easel, and they kind of help her learn how to paint. And it's been done now for years at a number of different zoos. They're actually good fundraisers because the paintings can be sold and therefore money raised. But that was another way that Sam and Neva, it was Neva's idea, but how they ended up, as we were working with Keiko, to pick out stuffed goats and things in the gallery as a way of getting his brain moving. This was a way of keeping Hannah thinking and fresh. Going out for walks. I've wondered about doing that. You know, I wouldn't probably have ever thought that you could walk an elephant, except that it's been done. And thanks to these zookeepers and thanks to Nolan, I was told stories about how the elephants are taken out for walks. Well, Sam had never heard of anything like that, of course. So in 1956, when he was new at this, Sam found a note taped to the door of the elephant barn in 1956, asking him to come up to the house. He got Hannah squared away in a hurry and headed up the hill. Miss Beetleman and Miss Effie weren't strong, either one of them. Miss Beetleman's rheumatism was bothering her more and more, and Miss Effie had a nasty little cough. He was relieved when the old woman answered herself, her quick old eyes dancing with excitement. "Mr. Brown, it's a pleasure to see you. Come in for just a moment while I get my coat and see if Effie would like to join us. Sit, sit." She bullied him into a chair in the front room and then hurried out. He could hear a faint conversation in the hall, and then she came back alone, wearing a man's heavy canvas barn coat and brandishing one of her walking sticks. "I'm afraid Effie won't be walking with us today. Her cough is worse. I've insisted that she call the doctor." "Come, Mr. Brown," she urged him out the door with a hand on his back. "I'll explain as we go." She led the way back to the barn, hobbling along at a remarkably fast clip. "Looks like you're feeling better today," Sam said. Yes, I feel quite myself, Mr. Brown. Slow as the dickens, of course, but never mind. At my age, it's best to lower one's standards." She chuckled to herself as they got near the elephant barn. "Now here's my plan. We're going to take Hannah for a walk." Sam frowned. "We don't have a lead or a halter." "We don't need one, Mr. Brown. Could you restrain her even if we had?" "No. The mahouts work with the elephants without restraints of any kind, and so shall we. Do you have an elephant hook? I know we did at one time. Go and see, Mr. Brown." And so they proceed to walk Hannah into the orchard, and it's something that Sam did with her until the property was divided by the Park Service, and they didn't have access to the orchard anymore. But I know from Nolan's stories that at Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium, certainly in Tacoma, a lot of the animals are taken for walks. And for an elephant to do so is a wonderful solution to getting them off the concrete, which is what's hurting them in the first place and breaking down their feet and ultimately possibly killing them. So the whole notion of walking really has great science behind it. Keiko was taken out of his bay pen on longer and longer walks. They were just walks in the ocean, and he was given a boat to follow. And so he would go where the boat went on longer and longer and sometimes multi-day swims, so that he was finally able to be buff enough and strong enough to swim long distance, and with the feeling that he'd done it before, that this wasn't some sudden, shocking, awful new bit. And for Hannah, of course, it allowed her to escape the zoo. When Winslow and Truman and Neva kidnapped her, essentially elephant napped her, and walked her away from the zoo completely and over to Matthew and Lavinia's property. That was something that helped them do it. One of my favorite characters, though it's really not very nice of me, was Martin Choi. I don't know if you remember Martin, but he was the dim-witted journalist. Because we spent so much time, I particularly spent so much time with the media, you quickly find that they're not all smart. And mine became a plot device. And so I'll read you a little about Martin Choi. He was not based on any particular reporter, and to the journalists among us, there are also excellent journalists. Most of the ones that we worked with were, but there were always a few who were kind of in the wrong profession. Martin Choi had a plan, and that plan did not include covering a beat for the Bladenham News-Gazette for the rest of his life. He was going places, and to do that he needed page-one bylines, unexpected story angles, scoops. He felt that his newfound access to the inner workings of the Max L. Beetleman Zoo might help him get there. Harriet Saul had made it clear that he would be on the inside of breaking news. That didn't mean he was going to sell out and become her boy. Oh no. He would use his investigative skills, look around, develop inside sources. He was 24 years old. He wanted to be working for the Seattle PI by his 26th birthday. He had 16 months to get there. And so Martin Choi becomes kind of a fall guy for Matthew and Lavinia's strategy of essentially sabotaging Harriet Saul by praise. When Martin Choi was fed a story that wasn't true at all about Harriet having done the right thing and agreeing to allow the elephant to go to a sanctuary when it wasn't even in her best interests or that of the zoo, he took it hook, line, and sinker, and thought, what a fine idea. So he ended up essentially kidnapping or hijacking one of Harriet Saul's presentations as Maxine, as she called herself, and announced to the world that this remarkable woman, at much cost to herself and her zoo, was doing the right thing, the right moral thing, and allowing Hannah to be sent to a sanctuary. Sabotage by praise. And of course it worked very well. But you always need one character who can be the patsy without necessarily knowing it, because they aren't smart enough. And I think it's the reading that'll do for you, because I can pound these truths too far. But when the book was done, I came away thinking, well, I did, I think, take a lot of the lessons that I learned from the Keiko Project and took the good things that I learned from the Keiko Project. And I hope I created a book that would resonate with people. And as a writer, and having now published my first book, and thinking anything I did now was going to be wonderful because it was me, I had a 2-book contract with Random House. My editor had said, no, I don't want an outline, I don't want a proposal from you, I don't want to know anything about your next book until you write it, because that's the only way I'll know what it is. So I thought, well, of course. Wrote Hannah's Dream, sent it to my editor, got a phone call about a week later that was, and I quote, Diane, this is your next book. That's way different than somebody saying, it's a pretty crummy book, but I think if we work really hard, we can fix it. This was just a flat, nuh-uh. So I cried a lot and went on and wrote Homesick Creek, which is my second book with Random House, and I think 4,000 people read it, and most of them were my family. And I thought, oh, well, what am I going to do now? Well, you know, maybe Hannah's Dream really wasn't that bad. Maybe I can resurrect it and turn it into something readable. So I spent some more time on it, and I sent it to my godlike editor, and she called me and she said, it's still not your next book. So that was a year and a half of my life, closer to 2, working on something that was just completely trashed. My agent scares the hell out of me, and so I turned to my agent and said, what do I do now? She said, you can shelve the book. And no one's going, don't shelve the book, it's an important message. And I said, yeah, but it's a really bad book. I mean, these people are telling me they're not even going to talk to me about it. So we put it away for a little while, and Nolan kept picking away at me to do something with it. And so I finally went back to my scary agent and said, we don't have a contract anyway, and I don't have another book written. So why don't you take it out to the marketplace and see if anybody might be interested in it? My first book was sold over a 3-day weekend. So things can move very quickly if it's going to be good news. 2 months later, I had heard nothing until I got a phone call from this woman who just scares the living daylights out of me, and she said, you know, you can shelve this book, right? I said, I know I can shelve the book. Well, she said, we have a crappy offer on the table, but, you know, here are the terms, and you can shelve the book. So she told me the terms, and I said, well, if they're interested and this isn't a very good deal, why don't you just keep on submitting? Oh, Diane, she said no one else wanted the book. This was the only offer. I'm feeling good about myself. I'm feeling strong. So I ended up saying, for Nolan's sake, it's probably a pretty crappy book because otherwise wouldn't everybody else have wanted it? And it was a different kind of a model in that the book never came out in hardcover. It came out as a paperback right away, and I was given a very small advance, and I thought, man, if actions speak, this is not a good book, but for Nolan's sake, you know, I'll let them publish it. 2 people will read it, and I'll have fulfilled my obligation to Nolan, and we can move on. And so imagine my astonishment when it came out, and people were writing me fan mail, and saying, we love the book, we love the elephant, etc., etc. And I'm still stunned. I still don't know that it's a very good book. I never think any of my books are very good, so it just disqualifies me as a judge. But what happened, as near as I can tell, is that it just struck a chord in a lot of us. And the editor who turned me down at Random House and my terrifying agent are both native Manhattanites. They still live in the city. I'm sure neither one of them has a pet. And I think that the disconnect for them was that they didn't get the whole animal thing. Not that it was a badly written book. I'm guessing, I don't know, neither of them has explained it to me, but the book is out. And because I didn't ever expect anyone to read it, I indulged myself by leaving in some characters that I shouldn't have. Johnson Johnson being the main one. Johnson Johnson, if you don't remember from the book, was this very artistic, almost savant-like character who personified wonder. People ask me, well, was he autistic? I mean, what was the deal with Johnson Johnson? I don't know if he was autistic or not. He just, to me, personified wonder. And because I didn't think anybody was going to read the book, the fact that he does nothing whatsoever to move the plot forward didn't trouble me at all, because I was the only one who was going to think about it. So I left in Johnson Johnson. And I probably let Miles the pig get a little bit out of hand because I was trying to be very, very careful to not anthropomorphize, to not give Hannah personal traits, human responses. I wanted her to be an elephant because zookeepers look on their animals as animals, not as just like us. But Miles was the fall guy. Miles was the comic relief. He popped into the book, completely surprising me. I know nothing about pigs, but I learned enough again to hopefully create a convincing pig. And he got to have semi-human characteristics. He was certainly the fool. He was the silly one. But he was in the book, and my editor didn't insist that I take him out, so I got lucky twice in leaving in 2 characters that I was very happy to have in there, but knew I shouldn't. Anyway, I would love to answer any questions. If there's anything you want to tell me or ask of me, this would be a good time to do it.
Was there a specific person that was the model for Max?
Yes and no. I love Max Beetleman. I hadn't thought of her at all. She wrote herself. When I grew up, I grew up in New York along the Hudson River, and there were some very extremely wealthy, old-moneyed families, and they often had eccentrics. They were just kooks. And so there were a couple of ladies, women, who lived in the town who were very much like Max. But I also love the idea of a very self-directed, strong woman who would do things that in her generation were not necessarily done. She was very eccentric. And of course, she was a lesbian and would never, ever have talked about that. Miss Effie was her personal secretary. I have a great aunt who had some, I don't know what the relationship was, but it was like a three-way thing with her husband and his secretary. But you didn't, it wasn't like now where we all want to know the exact truth. But so she's a composite of some of those people. And I loved the fact that she and Sam became friends. I didn't really plan that. In fact, he was fairly intimidated by her at first because she was a lady, a moneyed lady, a white lady. And that wasn't necessarily a good thing for a black man to be confronted with. But she and Sam had great respect for each other, and as the book developed and the relationship developed, they had a very strong friendship. And I decided that it was real and that it was plausible because they were both such outsiders. And they knew, each one knew exactly what the other one was dealing with. And they had huge mutual respect. And so that friendship was very real, though it was not overly well defined. The only time Max ever said anything to anybody in that book about her nature was when she asked him out in the orchard as Hannah was eating apples what he dreamed of when he was a boy. And he talked about the fact that a young African-American boy in the Northwest didn't necessarily have dreams. It wasn't necessarily a good idea to dream because their dreams were probably much more limited than a white child. And he said to her, "What were your dreams?" And she said, "I dreamed about being a little boy, Mr. Brown." And that was it. That was the only mention in the whole book, and that would have been an incredible thing to bring up, even to that very small extent. So.
How could you tell which movies Keiko liked and which ones?
It's a great question. The window that he watched watched TV through was about 12 feet down in the pool. The pool was 27 feet deep. If he stayed at the window, he was interested. And he was one eye at the glass. But of course he couldn't breathe down there. So he would wait as long as he possibly could and really needed to breathe, would shoot straight up, take one breath, and come straight back down to the window. If he didn't like the movies, he just swam away quickly.
Pause it for him when he went for air?
No. But it really was a remarkable experience to watch professional wrestling with a killer whale, to watch, the guy's leopard print outfit reflected on Keiko's nose was just the most odd thing.
In the book, there seems to be a sort of telepathic thing going on between the elephant and Sam.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything like that with Keiko?
Would you say? Not that clear. I have very strong sense that he and Nolan could pretty much get each other's number. I mean, I don't know that there was telepathy, I doubt it, but they could read each other's faces, expressions, habits. They pretty much knew what was what between them. And the way I got around that sort of telepathic thing between Sam, Corinna, and Hannah was because there was a baby who had been stillborn, and so Corinna and Sam were very sensitive to a soul, that there might be a soul that they weren't able to look after. And so when Max described reincarnation to them, they thought, we had felt some draw between ourselves and Hannah. Maybe that's the baby. Maybe the soul of the baby is Hannah, and they were born at the same time. Not many people worked the timeline out, but Hannah was exactly the same age as the baby would have been had she not been stillborn. So for that reason. And Sam just kept having this same dream of rolling farmland and other elephants, and he didn't know why, and it was hurtful to him. Dreaming that was not a happy thing because it showed him paradise, essentially. But it wasn't a place he'd ever been to or ever seen, and he had no idea what it meant. He just knew that he was dreaming it as Hannah because of his feet. He looked down and they were elephant feet, not his feet.
I like the fact that Sam takes care of Hannah. And as the story progresses, he then transfers that taking care of to that young boy.
Yes, Reginald Poole. There was Reginald Poole, who had no father and no real male role model, and I think Sam, as he became more and more aware that Hannah would go away one day, in a positive way, but that he was going to have time on his hands, he saw this young boy who was being taken care of by an aunt, but really had the potential for going badly astray, kind of a headstrong kid, and so he, although we aren't told exactly that by the end of the book, he always looked at Reginald as the next project, something he could do in retirement. You know, if you're used to living for somebody else and serving somebody else, how do you decide that your time is all yours, and once you retire, it's not going to be a natural thing to do? So Reginald Poole was certainly a new charge to take care of.
How did he come about?
Totally by accident, just the way everybody did. A lot of this book happened in the writing, not even thinking, but just as I was sitting at my keyboard. I don't even remember now why I had him come in. I know Winslow needed a buddy, so, and it was a kind of, Reginald just popped up, it just like Miles, and I don't even remember now how that happened, except it felt right. And because there were so few black people in their small fictional town, I wanted there to be at least a little bit of balance, that Sam and Corinna weren't literally the only African-American people. So for that reason, too, it kind of gave me a sense of balance among the cast that I thought I needed.
I'd like to add one more thing, too, if I might. And that's the fact that you mentioned the fact that he's black.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was reading the book, and it wasn't until I was well past my 100 that I even realized that he was black.
Page 137 to be exact.
Yeah.
But you have said, I thought that was great, though, but it didn't matter.
Yeah.
At that point, it didn't matter.
And I
People
think
are
that-
so generous.
We like him so well.
Well, let me tell you how that happened. I'm not black, I'm not male, I'm not 68. And yet my main character, because I'd seen it on TV, was going to be black, 68, and male. And I thought, how incredibly arrogant of me to think that I can create that character. I mean, what do I know? So I was worried that I would pander, that I would condescend, and that was the worst thing I could think of doing. I mean, how awful would that be to write a really bad character? So I made some choices, as all writers do, early on about dialect and how words are going to be spelled out or not. And I am going to, or I am gonna, G-O-N-N-A, that kind of thing. And I decided that Sam's speech would have a different musicality than typical white speech, but that it was going to be correct and that I would spell it all out. And so I was laboring over these, and draft after draft of dialogue that I thought was dumbed down too much, using too many ain'ts and neithers, and he wouldn't have talked like that. So by the time the book was done, I felt I'd made all the right decisions, put it in my editor's hands. She didn't have a whole lot of changes. The book came out. 1 week later, exactly, I sat bolt upright in bed at 2 in the morning thinking, oh my God, I didn't say he was black. I knew he was black, but I was trying so hard to not label him or stereocast him that it is, I think, page either 131 or 137, and if I was a reader, I would have been pissed. I would have gone, whoa, where did that come from? There actually are a lot of clues, but it depends on if you've lived around African Americans or not. The rhythm of the speech is different. He's calling her Shug. his interactions with Ray at Dunkin' Donuts. The people who've gotten it all along have tended to be people who've lived in cities or around African American populations enough to say, well, yeah, they were talking about cornrows and
I knew his thoughts before you tell you.
and it runs about 50-50. But nevertheless, that was not a nice thing to do to you. And my editor should have picked it up too, and we didn't. And so everybody's given me great credit for having, you know, been very subtle and as though I did it all on purpose, and I'm too honest to take credit for it. But I'm glad it didn't throw you.
No, I was actually, was pleased to discover it. Like,
Meant to be.
yeah.
Maybe so.
It's sort of like you knew it, but this just confirmed.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. I mean, he is enough different, and there are enough differences in speech that I'm hoping. Anyway, but like I said, it's right about 50-50.
The other thing that I liked about it was that I identified the person, and race meant nothing. And by having it exposed later, helped emphasize that
Yeah.
reality.
And I'm glad about that, because in fact, it didn't, he wasn't saddled with your stereotypes of what a black man is.
Right.
And I think it did let us see his character and his morals. And that's what we clung to first, what the character was, instead of the fact that he was black, and by the way. So my mistake actually had an upside as well as a downside, but it cost me about a year off my life. Every book group I've been to, and I've been to probably 50-something, every single one so respectfully asks me, now, why did you decide to do that? But it was very subtle, and no, I made a big mistake. And now I'm honest enough to tell you. Maybe when I've got 10 books under my belt, I won't be that honest, but I don't see the point of pretending to have done something great when I didn't. More questions?
Was there a reason why you had both Sam and Hannah have a bad leg?
It happened kind of, I don't know very much about diabetes, just like I don't know very much about elephants, but I know that foot problems are a huge issue with diabetics. And so I started writing about Corinna and Sam when he has his foot up on a hassock and she's trying yet another naturopathic ointment on him. And it was only after I wrote it that I thought, he has a bad foot, Hannah has a bad foot. Is that too many bad feet, or is that a good thing? And I decided, well, it really is a problem with diabetics, and it would have put an end to a work life where you're always on your feet. So I decided to think that maybe there was a nice kind of symmetry to it, or there were too many bad feet, and I just couldn't think of another problem that would be diabetes related. But, you know, a lot of and to the English teachers and other teachers in the room, I apologize, but whenever an English teacher says, now, what are the themes and symbols in this book, and what did the author have in mind here, I say to you all, we have nothing in mind. We have no idea. Those things happen by accident or magic, and it's a wonderful thing that they do, but I don't know a writer who plots that stuff out, and if they do, they probably wrote a boring book. I think there is something to be said for the subconscious in a writer, and these things just kind of burp up to the surface and we make use of them as they appear.
I thought the thing about the foot was another example of the flip. Like it.
Well, it's a nice piece of symmetry, isn't it? You know, and I think Hannah certainly knew when Sam wasn't feeling well, because she'd bring him those round rocks, her pebbles that and sometimes she brought him her tire, because that would have cheered her up, and so they were definitely onto each other. I mean, each one knew how the other one was doing. And so if he had a bad foot, she would have known he had a bad, I mean, there would have been a certain, I don't know if it would be companionability, but a certain understanding between the two of them that they know that problem because they each have it.
With the foot thing, what I like about it is it kind of also brought in how they're kind of both a victim of their circumstances and they share that commonality.
Well, and Hannah in particular, and any animal in any zoo that isn't up to standard to meet their needs, and there are an awful lot of them. I think those animals and those zookeepers who are keenly aware that this may not be the greatest exhibit in the world do develop that sort of familiarity with the problem. And they share that as a liability and that you're doing it the best you can. I mean, Keiko had no other killer whales. He hadn't seen another killer whale in more than 10 years. But he had Nolan and the others, and that was the best they could give him, and he recognized that under the circumstances, that was better than nothing, or dolphins. I think he enjoyed us more than the dolphins that he had been beat up by. So, you know, I think for the most part, we're realists, and I think animals probably are too. They don't give in to whining. In the wild, you don't get to whine. Who's listening? You just get on with it. So. Anyway, well, thank you so much for having me and for having read my book. And again, it was an honor to be here. And Ruth Ann, you are my hero. And Steve, my hat's off to you. You guys did a phenomenal job.
Thank you all for coming, and Diane will sign books if you want her to, and I think she's very open, and Nolan is too, to having you just visit with them. So thank you, have a good evening.